All right, I think it's time for us to get started. So, hello, folks, and welcome back to another episode of the Bug Bash. We're excited to have you all join us for another episode of this live series where we tackle, tackle? I don't know, maybe talk and tackle real world test automation challenges with the folks who are working in these challenges and overcoming them every single day. I am Jenna Beckett. I am your host, and it is great to be back here chatting with you all again today. And you are in the right place today if you are wanting to learn more about accessibility testing. And we have Mark, who is our in-house accessibility project manager, who's going to be talking to us all about how he tackles some accessibility challenges, writes some accessibility tests, and he's going to do that live with us today. Now, before we get started, I do want to congratulate this week's winner of the Bug Bash swag, and that is going to be the Don 100. Thank you for hanging with us last session, and I see you in the audience again this session, so watch for your direct messages. I'll be reaching out to you to send you a little swag, and remember that you could get a swag package just like them by leaving us a comment. What kind of content do you want to see us talk about here in these sessions, or just by attending live? Now, I have one more thing before I turn the mic over to Mark, and that is also to congratulate Cypress Ambassador Lasitha, and it is for their achievement on crossing 4,000 downloads in under 2 months of publishing his plugin, Cypress Intercept Search, which adds custom commands to search and assert values in intercepted requests and responses. So congratulations on that achievement, and thank you for your contribution to the plugin community around Cypress. That's all I have for you as far as introduction. So I'm going to turn it over to the person that you are all here to hear talk. So Mark, do you want to come up on stage and introduce yourself to let everybody get to know you?
Hey everybody. Doing a take two of this Bug Bash because I had just relocated to this co-working space right before, and a few things weren't as smooth as they ought to have been on the stream, which I think is totally fine for a live stream, but makes for kind of a boring recording to watch back as we work through some of those. But it's okay. I'm sure I'll make new mistakes now this time, and we'll be able to watch those, so I'm not as concerned about everything being super polished, but I do think we can have something that's a little bit better to watch back. So just the context for this Bug Bash is really trying to be a bit informal. I've got some notes in here of roughly the types of things we want to talk about. And on the live stream, I took a couple of questions that I'll bring up here as well. But by and large, I just went through some examples of accessibility issues and testing them, and some of the concerns around accessibility testing where it's useful to know about them when you're doing testing like this, and also giving a little preview of some new stuff in Cypress Accessibility itself. So first of all, when we're dealing with accessibility, we're talking about the ability of people with disabilities to use software and the features the software needs to have in order to be fully usable, fully understandable, and have an equal experience of the content to be able to carry out all the actions that somebody could have who didn't have a disability. This approach to defining accessibility influences how I think about everything with regard to accessible software development and testing and things like that. I think there are other benefits that we sometimes lean into when we're looking to advocate for accessibility work, like code quality or legal compliance and things like that. But at the heart of all of our decisions, we need to be bearing in mind the independence that's in our hands when we are adjusting our software behavior, and the independence that a user has that's affected by this. So essentially, we have control as software developers over how independent someone can be using what we make, and they're not really affected by their disability in terms of independence as much as they're affected by the tools we provide in the way that we build the software. So if somebody's using a screen reader and it's not possible for them to understand the nature of a button or what's supposed to happen when they click something or what content is interactive, that's stuff that's in our control, and we kind of have a dial over their independence and success. if we choose to use that to create software in a way that's adaptable by their technology. So our goal is really to meet users in the middle and give them enough information to be able to use things in a way that works for them. Accessibility testing, an overall approach, is kind of a Swiss cheese situation. So just like internet security and things like that, when we talk about Swiss cheese, it's like you don't have just one layer with some holes in it. You have many layers of protection and decisions for accessibility, all the way back into product development, into the research, into the ideas for what should be built, and then through design development into testing. And you want to do everything as far to the left as you can. The sooner you bring accessibility into the conversation, the cheaper and easier it will be to stay on track, rather than unpacking something later, which can be very difficult. So in terms of this approach in Cypress, I'm going to show some Cypress stuff here. We'll start by looking at a test itself. Let's close this. And we've got a test that's failing an accessibility check. There's a bunch of stuff in here, but at the start we have an AXCore check that's using the AXCore library by DQ Systems to verify the accessibility of the page, and there's one issue detected. There's a missing name on a button node, and we can see that that's up here. So if I pin this, this is the element that's in there. It's just a button hanging out in the DOM, and it doesn't have a name, and that's a traditional AXCore violation, and we can use the browser dev tools to explore this. So when we take a look at the element that's in there, I can come in, I can inspect in Cypress in here where the test is running, find the empty button, and be able to say for sure, yeah, it's got no name in there. And this is a typical type of thing that you can find with an accessibility scan. So that's one part of the Swiss cheese layer, is you want the information from something like AXCore to tell you when you have partially followed a known pattern. That's one of the things it's very good at. So you've made a button, but you haven't given it a label. You've built a form field, but you haven't wired in the label text correctly, those types of things. You made an image without a description. You've made a list, but it doesn't have the right type of children to be browsed as list items. There's all these things AXCore can check, and it's very effective if you have partial implementations. So here we have a button. It's missing this critical thing that would tell a user what's supposed to happen when it gets clicked. And clearly we have an accessibility failure here too. So we can come over to the code and we can fix this. And it's fine to catch this in a Cypress test. I'll just make an example. There we go. It's totally fine to catch this in a Cypress test, rerun it. Now we're all green. The tests are all passing in this page. That button looks different now too. It's got size because there's content in it. So that's all well and good. Even better sometimes to use a linter to catch things that are as clear as this, because you don't necessarily have to even run the test. You can tell from here with a linting tool that your code isn't going to be accessible. That, in an example like this, is actually pretty straightforward because all the HTML is co-located. We just have a HTML file here. We're not doing anything except visiting this page directly from the file system. So when it comes to the complexity of the code here, that's easy to catch this way. Linters struggle a bit more with large component systems and children components that are rendering out parts of this and parts of that. It's not always obvious there, and that's where finding these things with an AXCore scan in production, in development, in testing is way better than finding them in users reporting it to you or not being able to complete tasks or give you money or buy things in your store or something like that. So then the next thing we see here, I'm going to take away this role actually, because this is just going to start out as a simple div. So here we still have our tests happening in here. There's some behavior that's failing, right? We have a find by role check in here. So this is using testing library. It's a different part of the system. Testing library is a different layer in the Swiss cheese situation. And when we have a failure like this, we're trying to find something with role button and click it. And one thing we might do is you might say, actually, I don't really care about that. I'm just going to find this ID instead. So this is not going to make it any more accessible. But if we do cy.get button one.click, cool, it's going to do something. And it's doing something down here, right? We can see right here, if we click the button some more, It's just adding to the list of handlers that were clicked. So we have buttons that do things. They're just not real button elements, and they don't have the expected roles. And so we'll leave this example alone. We'll say we got it this way, or maybe we did a cy.contains like here. In fact, we'll just leave that cy.contains in there. And yeah, everything is okay. Test is still passing. So now we have the second example here, which is kind of before I had messed around with the DOM a little bit. We have role button on a div. So this is the other solution to find by role failing. If I take this away, find by role just won't work anymore because it doesn't have a role. So we get the failure immediately, and we get told, everything testing library sees that has a role. So one false solution is to do, like we did here, switch the strategy of how to locate the button. That's fine. The other option is to do find by role here, and then come in and fix the DOM to pass the check there. And we say, okay, we've given it a role, and we should be able to have something that's passing in here now. Great. So great from the perspective of a tester who wants their test to be green. Not great for accessibility. Div with a role button is not accessible by itself. There is a bunch of behavior that goes with buttons. Buttons are fantastic in terms of support in the browser, like normal HTML buttons. And you can simulate most button behavior by using event listeners and things like that. But you can't do everything that a browser is able to support with a standard button element. They're interactive, so they get special behavior in something like Windows high contrast mode. And that's an example of a thing that you can't recreate even if you try. But we're looking at other steps here. So someone might say, oh, the problem with this button, it's an accessibility problem. Even though everything is still green here, if I press tab, I can't focus button 1 and 2, but I can focus button 3. It's got tab index on it. So we can do the same thing for button 3. We'll say find by role button 3, and we click it, and we'll see our little output is going to have that in the list. Scroll down. Yep, there it is. But the tab index doesn't create anything in the browser that supports keyboard interactions with this button. It just creates focusability. So I can be here and I can press tab and space all day long till the cows come home, and nothing's going to be triggered the way a click would trigger it, because the browser does not do anything with role button plus tab index plus a click listener to put all those pieces together. So you could kind of cobble together the behavior of a button here mostly and have something that's pretty close to accessible, but still not as correct as a real button in the browser. So here, what we look at next is pressing the tab key to go from this button that had focus in our test. We do cy.press tab, which I'll come back to in a second. And then we're on button 5. And now we're typing into button 5 and performing these actions that trigger the effect of the button. And that lets us get these side effects in the test that we want. And so that gives us the behavior in the test where we're able to perform the actual interactions. And that is the best way to confirm something is working as expected, especially if you have a custom implementation. Strictly speaking, if you're using a real button element, I wouldn't bother necessarily testing the keyboard implementation that the browser has done for button elements. It's as old as time and it works. So just like if you're using a link, you don't strictly have to go to every link to know that it would take a user to those pages. When you're using a button, if it's a standard button element, it's way more likely to be accessible. So one of the approaches that works here, where we did focus it with a tab as an example, we can also say this form of locating the button, where we specify the element itself and the text that it contains. And this is a way more specific way to find the element than using find by role, which accepts kind of everything that has a role of button as opposed to a specific implementation of the button element itself. This to me is a really safe, robust way to grab a button in a test. That's the element selector plus the content, and then you have kind of restricted the test to only pass if we have an actual button element. Which if you look at the first rules of ARIA, the first rule is don't use it. Don't use a role if you can use a native HTML element. And that applies to buttons, dialog elements, everything you can think of that has a browser implementation. You should just use that browser implementation. You will save yourself a lot of work, you'll save the team a lot of work, you'll avoid accessibility problems, and you will overall have a higher quality of life if you use native semantic HTML. So as we go through this test, this is generally what we're discovering. There's a lot of ways to accomplish something as a side effect, like all of these buttons populate something down into the bottom in here, except this test one that we just made up. And that is intended to show the custom implementations that sometimes get through Axe Core and things like that. Because here we have a green report, testing library is also green, like everything that's using testing library is able to find the elements. But we do have some accessibility problems as we saw. We can only focus on some of these. Only this one is what I would consider an acceptable button. So all of these things that are in the test are suspicious, and some of them should show up in some sort of automated scan, but they don't because they just appear to be generic content. So when you look in here, when Axe Core evaluates the page, the reason that this is green is that it just sees a div, and it sees div role button and things like that that are normal content. It's not really looking for the accessibility behavior. I think if we had role button and we took away the name, let's see what happens there. We're going to come back over here, rerun the test, and we see a few different problems. We first see it is not accessible because the test is not working anymore, and it fails before the Axe Core check even runs, so that's fine. We can move the Axe Core check to be earlier. Yeah, so with role button, this is detected as an issue. And the absence of a name is an issue, right? We can determine role button implies there should be a name there. And so if we come back over, we'll fix this code for button 2. Should be able to refresh here and see that this test is passing again. So the role button does have some effect on how Axe Core perceives it, but it does not perceive that div role button has these extra risks that need to be managed, because it's not always clear how things are actually used in terms of the content. So we'll come back and we'll look at the tab for just a second again. So there's a few different things that happen in here, but first of all, Cypress tab is new. This is a command that was added this year. This has been kind of in demand for a long time as a way of doing accessibility testing in Cypress. And this is just the first of many native keyboard events that are coming. Typically, keyboard events have been simulated in Cypress in the past, so you can use them for filling out forms and stuff like that. But testing just what happens if a user presses tab and fire the event into the browser and what's supposed to come next. That hasn't been supported natively in Cypress. You've had to use plugins to do that. So now we can do it here. This is good. I put the string in here of just tab, not as the canonical good example for this. Our docs don't show this, but it is, I think, a little easier to grok what this is doing. It's just pulling a string, even though the ideal way to do it is to pull that string directly from the constants in Cypress. That will be a lot more maintainable as a solution to get these events written up. And so that tab key let us move focus from one place to the next, and that's pretty cool. But we have this other thing we can do as well. So I'm going to narrow this in to run another test instead. So this is using a tab all elements command that is just a function my buddy Tyler at Cypress created after we shipped cy.tab that the app team worked on in detail. And this gives us something we can use to check for focusability in various ways. So here we're finding everything that has this ID that includes the word button, which in the way this application is coded, that's everything we expect to be a button. And then we can tab through everything and see how many things got tabbed as a result of that. And how many of those were there? Well, it should be the same as the amount of things we think are buttons based on the way we've coded our buttons, and it's not, it's failing. So we can see there was 4 tabbable elements detected. This was the start of the tab order, this was the end of the tab order, and in between there's 2 other elements that are focusable. that totally agrees with our manual testing, right? It's going to turn it to be these. And so this helper custom command in here spits out this array, and that's what happens. Those are the elements that are focusable here. So being able to derive that backwards from what responds to the tab key helps you to write like a little loop that performs an accessibility check on the tab order and just verifies it against some expectation. So here we're saying it's the length of things we think are a button. There's a subsequent test that does a snapshot check. So here we're going to do a snapshot test of the, let's do it here, of the behavior here. So we say array 4 should equal array 4, and that's coming from this file in here. So if I delete one of the things in the snapshot, what we're going to find out is the tab order has changed, and that's something that we can use to fail a test. And this does not create the automatic ability to know if the tab order is right or not. This just gives us a reference point to say it's not what it used to be before. What it used to be before was correct. And if something has happened to break the tab sequence, we've got that behavior there. Likewise, if we just accidentally had the tab order, incorrect, yeah, why is that there now? See, it's just like a regular live stream. Random stuff in the clipboard. Let's move this over. Cool. And so now the same number of items is present, but the sequence has changed. What we're seeing instead of the standard tab order that we wanted, we're seeing 3, 4, 5 here, like this is the order that we have, but our specification is actually button 3 should come up. And so this kind of snapshot testing really is a bit like visual regression. You're going to be able to say that this order of the tab keys is correct for this context in this application at this moment in time. It's useful to do this kind of check at runtime, even though in Cypress Accessibility we have things that run outside of runtime, not during test execution. Here, for tab order, the application might respond to the tab key in different ways and have different things that happen than just moving from one element to another. So accounting for all of those in some way is really useful. And here's what that command looks like in here that performs this check. So the plan is to publish this into our recipes so you can go through and add this if you wanted to do this kind of check yourself. To move everything around. There's quite a few pieces to it, but then you have the flexibility to extend this and do what you need to with the focusable elements in the page. So we'll take a look at something else as well. I'm going to fix this to be passing. And then we'll look at links. So buttons and links, of the things I thought I would talk about, there's a bunch of more complicated examples as well. But in practice, what I've seen in the at this stage, like dozens of different projects I've looked at for specifically semantic HTML type issues. These are things that I've noticed are really common, just using things as links and as buttons that are not intended for that purpose. So here we have a page. We'll just go back to this snapshot here. This has got some links in it, and the links are in this form, like a normal link, and then there's two different kinds of spans, and there's a span with a row, there's an SVG image. And so the behavior here, we're not going to see any of the handlers triggered populating, but we're going to see the page navigation happen. And so in the code, this is several different kinds of links. The very first kind is, like I said, totally normal link. On the right-hand side here, I was looking at the wrong part of the page. And here we have a real link going to the example Cypress kitchen sink site. So we can see that there. Then we've got several different flavors here. Let's correct this in the DOM for sure. We've got several different flavors of links that are going to render and reset the href on the page. So you can do that with a span, you can do that with a span that has a role, you can do that with an SVG. Everything in here is like some kind of pattern you might see in the wild, like if there's an icon or something this SVG might represent. And the person who implements it is thinking through not the accessibility lens, but just how do I accomplish getting this image, this icon, to move the user to the next thing. So if it's like a help icon or something and you click it and you go to the help page, it seems very natural, and without being aware of accessibility, somebody could very easily create just this JavaScript on-click handler in one way or another, and that would be the behavior that we get. So in these links, we see this behavior in here, and in reality, there's some missing accessibility for all 4 of those, or for 3 of these, and one of them is fine. And so what I'm going to do is record all of the current Cypress tests, right? These 2 example specs we've looked at, and let those tests go to the cloud and show you what we've got that's new in Cypress Cloud. So for the last little while, we've been working on joining the test interactions with the accessibility report that we already generate with Xcore. And so here we have a run that just completed. Let's refresh, actually. We should see run number 7 coming in. There it is. And so this has an accessibility report that was processed on the cloud. So this is based on the test replay data from the run. Nothing else happened here at execution time. And so within these specs, we can see some of these suspicious elements are showing up here. This role link is suspicious. It's got a Cypress rule that's failing, so there is some Xcore failures as well around the structure of the page and things like that. But we've got this example link, this other example link, this suspicious looking rectangle over here. It's not every single one of them that's showing up, but this is the kind of thing you can detect when you take into account how a user uses the elements in a test. And that is a layer of information that's missing from something like a scan with Xcore or any other kind of static analysis process. It's also not something you can really account for in a code linter. You need to understand a description of how a user is supposed to use these elements. We've got a couple other runs in here as well we can take a look at. Let's grab this one, see what the references are in here. That's all from the newer stuff, so we're going to go back a little bit to see a run that's recorded using some of those other elements that we had. So in this run, we're looking at the buttons, and that's going to show us as well these inconsistent, non-standard uses of a button that you can detect in a test. So this is why I've been looking at so many accessibility reports recently and working with lots of teams on how they implement accessibility checks and the way they think about it, which led me to this notes in here, right? Where does automation fit within the accessibility process? How are people doing it? And we see some things like we saw, right? You can run accessibility scans. You can use testing library locators. In general, testing library will help you make sure you are doing things in a more accessible way. It's especially useful in component testing to make sure that your form fields can be located by their labels and things like that. We looked at one gap in testing library just now, but that's completely not the main focus of testing library. Find by role is really common. It's really good if the element cannot use the first rule of ARIA and requires a custom implementation, then making sure it has the role is as good as you can get. It's really good for, like I said, the label lookups and things like that. But as an accessibility defense for making sure that your buttons and links and things are working correctly, it has that weakness that you can put the role on anything, and anything will then pass the accessibility check or the perceived accessibility check from testing library. So I'm not saying testing library is bad or don't use it. You should definitely use it, especially for forms. I feel like is one of the most important and kind of outstanding use cases for it. But it is okay once you've located something once with testing library in a component test or something. You don't necessarily have to repeat the usage if it's more convenient for test IDs or something else to be used in the end-to-end context. As long as the accessibility is checked somewhere, you need similar accessibility validation, whether you're using testing library or not. One other big thing, I didn't talk about this yet, is how you would handle a known existing accessibility bug, where somebody reports something from production and you go and you fix it. Like every other bug, you should write a failing test for that accessibility issue. You should be able to have your pipeline fail if that issue comes back, and you should write that test as close to the source of the issue as you can. So if you were to find an issue with a component, like a form field, it would be better to solve that issue at the root as much as possible of where that form field is rendered, not maybe impose some solution from this one place where you found the problem. And so writing explicit normal Cypress tests for accessibility issues is a way to kind of bubble up your coverage beyond what you might expect for accessibility because you're patching regressions you know are there. And like I said, you can do the tab order types of testing, which we'll share that recipe for that custom command. And so because there's all these pieces of the puzzle for accessibility in this Swiss cheese approach, you can accomplish great things with automation in the tests themselves. You have some trade-offs to consider around training and performance and enablement often, because a lot of the teams I've talked to, it is a small number of accessibility specialists trying to support a large team of developers who are wanting to move really quickly. Failing the functional tests for accessibility is a little bit more controversial than like making a ticket for an issue and things like that. And also developers just have uneven experience. And so even though you can accomplish these things in tests, it can be hard to scale the approach to managing accessibility risk to people who don't have that accessibility mindset coming with them. And so developers might do some of these mistakes that I made deliberately here. And if you're experienced in accessibility, you might say, no one's just going to make a div with a roll button and call it done. But those things happen all the time. And so when we were able to reveal those in Cypress Accessibility alongside the standard Axe core findings, we're going to be able to provide this type of insight without any action taking place in the test. All the test has to do is be recorded to the cloud. And then you can try this out for yourself if you wanted to. There's a free trial form here that we'll put a link to in the description of this. And this will give you access to all the reports in the cloud, just like this real-world application here. You get all the accessibility rules. It'll break it down by the pages that you're visiting. And you'll get that new accessibility check that's based on the interactions. So you can see for yourself, like, what's the outcome of that? My experience has been like hundreds of things have been found this way already in the small number of customers that we've rolled it out to. And we've done a bit of work on refining it to avoid false positives and things like that. But your feedback could be really helpful in determining if there's anything else that we've missed, anything else that can be improved. And then the future of this is to evolve into more specific rules than this one kind of general interaction check here. So that we can offer like the feedback on what you maybe should do based on what we see, what were you trying to accomplish, and then guide you to the correct solution in here. So that's a collection of things you can do in here. There's a lot more that you'll be able to see in a trial as well. There's a branch comparison where you can look at the accessibility changes, for example. So here between run 6 and run 7, we don't have this page anymore, so this issue has disappeared. And if we go back and compare with another run, we'll see like the comparison in the report is different, right? There's some new elements that are seen that have accessibility issues because they are in this kitchen sink page. That was one of the pages we happened to link to. And so on that run 7, you can come in and you can see reports based on the pages that we actually visited, not just the single accessibility scan for a moment in time or anything like that. But like we did our work here on this page and it happened to go to this page. This page also got a scan on the Cypress Cloud side. So as you, if you sign up for the trial, we'll just turn it on for you for a week. You'll be able to see it. You can talk to us if you want to extend that or you're interested in like a more detailed demo and walkthrough and talking about how it applies to your data and everything. So we're happy to do that. But now we are definitely also able to offer the trial with like no strings, no meeting, nothing like that. All right, I hope this helps, and thanks.